Hey everyone, welcome to the second January 6th research stream. I'll be doing some more research into the topic of January 6th, in part because I want to become more knowledgeable about the subject, in part because I want to debate people on it, including my upcoming debate with Xenomancer and Mr. Shikaki, moderated by Lieutenant Sarge next month. So that should be interesting, and I want to be ready for that and future conversations. So here we go. Probably go for about an hour and a half here, and then I'll hit the gym. So shouldn't be too long of a stream. Where we left off, Mr. Cipollone had told the select committee that he had, quote, seen no evidence of massive fraud in the election, and that he, quote, forcefully, unquote, made his point, quote, over and over again, unquote. For example, during a late night group meeting with President Trump on December 18th, at which he and Hirschman urged Trump not to heed the advice of several election conspiracists at the meeting. Cipollone, they didn't think that we were, they didn't think we believed this, that there had been massive fraud in the election. And the reason they didn't think we believed it is because we didn't. Committee staff. And you articulated that forcefully to them during the meeting. Cipollone, I did, yeah. I'd seen no evidence of massive fraud in the election. At some point, you have to deliver with the evidence. And I just go back to what Barr said. He had not seen any, and I was not aware of any evidence of fraud to the extent that it would change the results of the election. That was made clear to them, okay, over and over again. Similarly, White House attorney Eric Hirschman was also very clear about his views. They never proved the allegations they were making, and they were trying to develop. All right. Go ahead and take this here. Oh, that's already there. In short, President Trump was informed over and over again by his senior appointees, campaign experts, and those who had served him for years that his election fraud allegations were nonsense. How did President Trump continue to make false allegations despite all of this unequivocal information? Trump sought out those who were not scrupulous with the facts and were willing to be dishonest. He found a new legal team to assert claims that his existing advisors and the Justice Department had specifically informed him were false. President Trump's new legal team, headed by Rudolph Giuliani and their allies, ultimately lost dozens of election lawsuits in federal and state courts. The testimony of Trump campaign manager Bill Stepien helps to put this series of events into perspective. Stepien described his interaction with Giuliani as an intentional self-demotion, with Stepien stepping aside once it became clear that President Trump intended to spread falsehoods. Stepien knew the president's new team was relying on unsupportable accusations, and he refused to be associated with their approach. There were two groups of family. We called them kind of my team and Rudy's team. I didn't mind being characterized as being part of Team Normal, as reporters, started kind of started to do around that point in time. Having worked for Republican campaigns over 2 decades, Stepien said, quote, I think along the way I've built up a pretty good, I hope a good reputation for being honest and professional, and that was happening I didn't think what was happening was necessarily honest or professional at that point in time. As Giuliani visited campaign headquarters to discuss election litigation, The Trump campaign's professional staff began to view him as unhinged. In addition, multiple law firms previously engaged to work for the Trump campaign decided that they could not participate in the strategy being instituted by Giuliani. They quit. Campaign General Counsel Matthew Morgan explained that he had conversations with, quote, probably all of our counsel who were signed up to assist on election day, as they disengaged with the campaign. The general consensus was that the law firms were not comfortable making the arguments that Rudy Giuliani was making publicly. When asked how many outside firms expressed this concern, Morgan recalled having, quote, a similar conversation with most all of them. I guess we can probably make this a section, but I'm not sure how much they're going to focus on this specifically in the report. Stepien grew so wary of the new team that he locked Giuliani out of his office. Committee staff. Yeah, I'm getting the sense from listening to you here for a few hours that you sort of chose to pull back, that you were uncomfortable with what Mr. Giuliani and others were saying and doing, and therefore you were purposefully stepping back from a day to day role as the leader of the campaign. Is that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that accurate? Stepien, that's accurate. That's accurate. You know, I had my assistant, it was a big glass kind of wall office in our headquarters, and I had my assistant lock the door. I told her, don't let anyone in. I'll be around when I need to be around. Tell me what I need to know. Tell me what's going on here. But, you're going to see less of me. And, sure enough, Mayor Giuliani to you, he says you know a lot. Get in my office and ordered her to unlock the door. And she didn't do that. She's, smart about that. But your words are ones I agree with. Actually, we can probably categorize this as the same. And I'll take Collins too. But try to keep it like relevant to the topic or be very short if not. Over the weeks that followed, dozens of judges across the country specifically rejected the allegations of fraud and irregularities being advanced by the Trump team and their allies. For example, courts described the arguments as, quote, an amalgamation of theories, conjecture, and speculation, allegations sorely wanting of relevant or reliable evidence, strained legal arguments without merit, assertions that did not prove by any standard of proof that any illegal votes were cast and counted, and even a fundamental and obvious misreading of the Constitution. Reflecting back on this period, Trump campaign communications director Tim Murtaugh texted colleagues in January 2021 about a news report that the New York State Bar was considering expelling Rudolph Giuliani over the Ellipse rally. Why wouldn't they expel him based solely on the outrageous lies he told for 2.5 months? This is exactly what ultimately came to pass. So this was a text sent by Trump campaign communications director about this. Okay, that's useful. It doesn't speak to Trump's knowledge, though, necessarily, but it's. This is exactly what ultimately came to pass. When suspending his license, a New York court said that Giuliani, quote, communicated demonstrably false and misleading statements to courts, lawmakers, and the public at large in his capacity as lawyer for former President Donald J. Trump and the Trump campaign in connection with Trump's failed effort at re-election in 2020. The court added that, quote, the seriousness of Giuliani's uncontroverted, of which the truth or validity is not disputed. Okay. Misconduct cannot be overstated. All right, 82. So was he disbarred or not? Or well, he was disbarred in New York, but not D.C. Maybe. I'm gonna quickly read this through an archive and come back. Okay, he's been suspended. His legal license has been suspended. Is that different from being disbarred though? Okay. All right. So disbarred is permanent, whereas suspended is temporary. Other Trump lawyers were sanctioned for making outlandish claims of election fraud without evidence to back them up, including Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood, and seven other Trump pro-Trump lawyers, in a case that a federal judge described as, quote, a historic and profound abuse of the judicial process. It is one thing to take on the charge of vindicating rights associated with an allegedly fraudulent election. It is another to take on the charge of deceiving a federal court and the American people into believing that rights were infringed without regard to whether any laws or rights were in fact violated. This is what happened here. Okay, which court was this? King versus Whitmer. Michigan, okay. So this was the Sixth Circuit, federal? Yep. Okay. All right. It might be worth, I'm not sure it will be, but it might be worth going a little bit more into this case, the King versus Whitmer case. At least a summary of what they were alleging. Plaintiffs' Michigan voters allege that Republican poll observers were denied the opportunity to meaningfully observe election workers forged and altered ballots and that defective ballots were still counted. Plaintiffs claim these purported executive branch violations of the election code violate both the Elections and Electors Clause, and that, as a remedy, the court should either decertify Michigan's results or certify them for Trump. Dispositive rulings. The court held that the suit is barred by the 11th Amendment. The case is now moot. The doctrine of laches applies in that plaintiffs waited too long to bring their claims. Abstention doctrine applies since parallel state proceedings are ongoing, in that plaintiffs failed to establish any injury sufficient to meet standing requirements. So that was the original case, I guess, and this is the Sixth Circuit case. Dispositive rulings, appellate brief. Okay. What am I looking at here? The court denied petitioner's motion to expedite consideration of the petitions for writ of certiorari. Oh God, it's 25 pages. The judgment is vacated and the case remanded to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit for further consideration in light of Taylor v. Rogias. See, I don't know what this is. The all these names. Oh, wait, these are all his cases. His 60 cases that he that'd be my assumption that they're okay, so okay, so it's breaking the cases down. Or this is a list of are these Trump's cases, or are these just the list of the cases that the court itself was hearing? So did that come from King versus Whitmer? I'm pretty sure it was the source. So, oh, you could just literally, okay, it's on their website. Cool. There we go. That's much better. Okay. That's actual readable text. All right. Kethledge Circuit Judge, 3 voters and 3 Republican nominees to the Electoral College in Michigan, brought this suit in a bid to overturn the results of the state's 2020 presidential election. The complaint plausibly alleged that Republican election challengers had been harassed and mistreated during vote counting at the TCF Center in Detroit, in violation of Michigan law. But the complaint also alleged that an international collaboration with origins in Venezuela, extending to China and Iran, and including state actors in Michigan itself, had succeeded in generating hundreds of thousands of fraudulent votes in Michigan, thereby swinging the state's electoral votes to Joseph Biden. Many of these allegations, particularly the ones concerning Dominion voting machines, were refuted by the plaintiffs' own exhibits to their complaint. Other allegations arose from facially unreliable expert reports. Still others were simply baseless. The district court found the entirety of the plaintiff's complaint sanctionable and ordered all of the plaintiff's attorneys jointly and severally to pay the defendants and the city of Detroit's reasonable attorney fees. We find only part of the complaint sanctionable and thus reverse in part and affirm part in part. How long is the opinion itself? Is there no like summary? Okay, well, this might be something I read through later at some point in my life, but not tonight. A group of prominent Republicans have more recently issued a report titled Lost Not Stolen, examining every count of every case brought in these 6 battleground states by President Trump and his allies. The report concludes that, quote, President that Donald Trump and his supporters had their day in court and failed to produce substantive evidence to make their case. President Trump and his allies failed because of a lack of evidence and not because of erroneous rulings or unfair judges. In many cases, after making extravagant claims of wrongdoing, Trump's legal representatives showed up in court or state proceedings empty handed and then returned to their rallies and media campaigns to repeat the same unsupported claims. Okay, this is probably going to be worth taking a look at. The Lost Not Stolen document. All right, I'll have to take a look at this at some point. There is no reasonable basis for the allegation that these dozens of rulings by state and federal courts were somehow politically motivated. The outcomes of these cases was uniform regardless of who appointed the judges. One of the authors of Lost and Not Stolen, longtime Republican election lawyer Benjamin Ginsburg, testified before the Select Committee that, quote, in no instance did a court find that the charges were fraud were real. Without variation, based on the judges involved, indeed, 11 of the judges who ruled against Donald Trump and his supporters were appointed by Trump himself. All right, I want to get through all of the. Actually, before we move on to the specific cases, I do want to go over something else, which is all of his other lawyers who got disbarred or suspended. Or actually, I might do the courts thing over in a different set of streams at some point. Well, I'll do both. Might as well. If it's in the report as well, I'll go over it here, and then I'll also maybe go over it a separate time on air as well. All right. Sidney Powell, suspended, legal, or just put suspended. See what comes up. And I'm assuming this is referencing that. July 5. Tossed out disciplinary action. Okay. This is 2023, February 24, 2023. This is June 23, 2023. Okay, so this is older. Oh, okay, so this is at the state level. This one here is, whereas this was federal sanctions. So have they not decided yet? Wait, was Wood actually disbarred or is it still pending? Oh, he was. Okay. All right, cool. Well, not cool for him, I guess, but reflecting back on this period, Trump campaign communications director Tim Murtaugh texted colleagues in January 2021 about a news report. Oh yeah, we've already done that. Read that. This is exactly what came to pass when suspending. I feel like I've read this too. Okay. One of the authors of Lost Not Stolen, longtime Republican election lawyer Benjamin Ginsburg testified before the select committee that, quote, in no instance did a court find that the charges of fraud were real, without variation based on the judges involved. Indeed, 11 of the judges who ruled against Trump and his supporters were appointed by Trump himself. Okay. One of those Trump nominees, Judge Stephanos Bibas of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, rejected an appeal by the Trump campaign claiming that Pennsylvania officials, quote, did not undertake any meaningful effort to fight illegal absentee ballots and even and uneven treatment of voters across counties. Judge Bibas wrote in his decision that, quote, calling an election unfair does not make it so. Charges require specific allegations and then proof. We have neither here. Another Trump nominee, Judge Brett Ludwig of the Eastern District of Wisconsin, ruled against President Trump's lawsuit, alleging that the result was skewed by illegal procedures that governed drop boxes, ballot address information, and individuals who claimed, quote, indefinitely confined, unquote, status of vote from home. Judge Ludwig wrote in his decision that, quote, this court has allowed the plaintiff the chance to make his case, and has lost on the merits because the procedures used, quote, do not remotely rise to the level, unquote, of breaking Wisconsin's election rules. I better get these quotes in here. Nor is it true that these rulings focus on standing or procedural issues, solely on standing or procedural issues. As Ginsburg confirmed in his testimony to the Select Committee, President Trump's team, quote, did have their day in court, unquote. Indeed, he and his co-authors determined in their report that 30 of these post-election cases were dismissed by a judge after an evidentiary hearing had been held. Oof. And many of these judges explicitly indicated in their decisions that the evidence presented by the plaintiffs was wholly insufficient on the merits. Okay. And many of these judges explicitly indicated in their decisions that the evidence presented. Okay, that's good to include as well. Okay. Ultimately, even Rudy Giuliani and his legal team acknowledged that they had no definitive evidence of election fraud to change the election outcome. For example, although Giuliani repeatedly had claimed in public that Dominion voting machines stole the election, he admitted during his select committee deposition that, quote, I do not think the machine stole the election. An attorney representing his lead investigator, Bernard Couric, declared in a letter to the Select Committee that, quote, it was impossible for Carrick and his team to determine conclusively whether there was widespread fraud or whether that widespread fraud would have altered the outcome of the election. Carrick also emailed President Trump's chief of staff on December 28, 2020, writing, we can do all the investigations we want later, but if the president plans on winning, it's the legislators that have to be moved, and this will do just that. Other Trump lawyers and supporters, Jenna Ellis, John Eastman, Phil Waldron, and Michael Flynn, all invoked their Fifth Amendment privileges against self-incrimination when asked by the Select Committee what supposed proof they uncovered that the election was stolen. Not a single witness, nor any combination of witnesses, provided the Select Committee with evidence demonstrating that fraud occurred on a scale even remotely close to changing the outcome in any state. Oh boy, that's big. I can't believe Giuliani testified to that. Doesn't seem like it's in his interest to do so, unless he's like turning over a new leaf, or he's just an idiot. An attorney representing his lead investigator, Bernard Carrick. Same person? New York Police Department? 40th Commissioner. Okay. Or it would be, I guess it would be 2020 election investigation. Was he the lead investigator though? I know it says that. And the lead investigator for Trump or the lead investigator for Giuliani? Because it looks like he's more of a Giuliani guy with some ties to Trump. Well, Trump granted him clemency, it looks like. So, well, is that true? Trump clemency? He pardoned him. Oh, okay, so he worked with Giuliani. It looks like cool. Carrick also emailed President Trump's chief of staff on December. Okay, cool. Other Trump lawyers and supporters. Okay. By mid-December 2020, Donald Trump had come to what most of his staff believed was the end of the line. The Supreme Court rejected a lawsuit he su- supported Wait, hang on. The Supreme Court rejected a lawsuit he supported filed by the state of Texas in the Supreme Court. And Donald Trump had this exchange, according to a special assistant to the president, Cassidy Hutchinson. The president was fired up about the Supreme Court decision. And so I was standing next to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and but I had stepped back. The president was just raging about the decision and how it's wrong. And why didn't we make more calls? And just this typical anger outburst at this decision. And the president said, I think, so he had said something to the effect of, I don't want people to know we lost, Mark. This is embarrassing. Figure it out. We need to figure it out. I don't want people to know that we lost. On December 14, 2020, the Electoral College met to cast and certify each state's electoral votes. By this time, many of. Actually, I should probably get more information on that real quick. Labor Secretary Gene Scalia told the committee that he called President Trump around this time and gave him such feedback quite directly. Oh, wait, hang on. All right, on December 14, 2020, the Electoral College met to cast and certify each state's electoral votes. By this time, many of President Trump's senior staff and certain members of his family were urging him to concede that he'd lost. Labor Secretary Gene Scalia told the committee that he called President Trump around this time and gave him such feedback quite directly. So I had put a call in to the president. I might have called on the 13th. We spoke, I believe, on the 14th, in which I conveyed to him that I thought it was time for him to acknowledge that President Biden had prevailed in the election. But I communicated to the president that when the legal process is exhausted and when the electors have voted, that's the point at which that outcome needs to be expected. And I told him that I did believe, yes, that once those legal processes were run, if fraud had not been established that had affected the outcome of the election, that unfortunately I believed that what had to be done was concede the outcome. I wonder if it'd be worth making a timeline of events, but probably not. I mean, it would be worth it, but a lot of work. I'm sure someone's already done this, yes? I mean, this kind of like is a timeline, but it's not in direct order. Deputy White House Press Secretary Judd Deere also told President Trump that he should concede. He recalled other staffers advising President Trump at some point to concede, and that he, quote, encouraged him to do it at least once after the Electoral College met in mid-December. White House counsel Pat Cipollone also believed President Trump should concede. Quote, if your question is did I believe he should concede the election at a point in time? Yes, I did. Attorney General Bill Barr told the Select Committee this, and in my view, that the December 14th Electoral College vote was the end of the matter. I didn't see, I thought this would lead inexorably to a new administration. I was not aware at that time of any theory, why this could be reversed. And so I felt that the die was cast. Barr also told the committee that he suggested several weeks earlier that the president's efforts in this regard needed to come to an end soon. In a conversation with several White House officials after his meeting with Trump on November 23rd. As I walked out of the Oval Office, Jared was there with Dan Scavino, who ran the president's social media, and who I thought was a reasonable guy and believe is a reasonable guy. And I said, how long is he going to carry on with this stolen election stuff? Where is this going to go? And by that time, Meadows had caught up with me and leaving the office and caught up to me and he said, look, I think that he's becoming more realistic and knows there's a limit to how far he can take this. And then Jared said, yeah, we're working on this. We're working on it. All right, that's going to get its own section. Actually, we can just put it into the section. All right, I'm going to wrap up relatively soon. Despite all of that, Donald Trump was being told he continued to purposely and maliciously make false claims to understand the very stark differences between what he was being told and what he said publicly and in fundraising solicitations. The committee has assembled the following examples. Oh no. Then Deputy Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen. And so he said, "Well, what about this? I saw it on the videotape. Somebody delivering a suitcase full of ballots." And we said it wasn't a suitcase, it was a bin. That's what they use when they're counting ballots. It's benign. President Trump 1 week later. There is even security camera footage of Georgia that shows officials. Oh no. Oh no, he's so fucked. Telling poll watchers to leave the room before pulling suitcases of ballots out from under the tables and continuing to count for hours. Acting Attorney General Richard Donahue, December 27th and 31st. I told the president myself that several times in several conversations that these allegations about ballots being smuggled in a suitcase and run through the machine several times, it was not true. That we looked at the video, we interviewed the witnesses, that it was not true. I believe it was in the phone call on December 27th. It was also in the meeting in the Oval Office on December 31st. President Trump that week, later that week. January 2nd. She stuffed the machine, she stuffed the ballot. Each ballot went 3 times. They were showing, here's ballot number one. Here it is a second time, third time. Next ballot. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, January 2nd. You're talking about the State Farm video, and I think it's extremely unfortunate that Rudy Giuliani or his people, they sliced and diced that video and they took it out of context. We did an audit of that, and we proved conclusively that they were not scanned 3 times. Yes, Mr. President, we'll send you the link from WSB. I don't care about a link, I don't need it. President Trump 1 day later. I spoke to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger yesterday about Fulton County and voter fraud in Georgia. He was unwilling or unable to answer questions such as the ballots under the table scam, ballot destruction, out of state voters, dead voters, and more. He has no clue. How many more are there? Oh my gosh. Attorney General Bill Barr, December 1st, 2020, when he realized the big vote dump, as he called it in Detroit, and he said, oh, then he raised the big vote dump, as he called it, in Detroit. And, he said people saw boxes coming into the counting station at all hours of the morning and so forth. I said, Mr. President, there are 630 precincts in Detroit. And unlike elsewhere in the state, they centralized the counting process, so they're not counting in each precinct. They're moved to counting stations. And so the normal process would involve boxes coming in at all different hours. And I said, did anyone point out to you, did all of the people complaining about it point out to you, you actually did better in Detroit than you did last time? I mean, there's no indication of fraud in Detroit. President Trump 1 day later. I'll tell you what's wrong. Voter fraud. There's an example. Here's an example. This is Michigan. At 6:31 in the morning, a vote dump of 149,772 votes came in unexpectedly. We were winning by a lot. That batch was received in horror. In Detroit, everybody saw the tremendous conflict. There were more votes than there were voters. Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue, December 27th, 2020. The president then continued. There are more votes than voters, but I was aware of that allegation. And I said, that was just a matter of them comparing the 2020 votes cast to 2016 registration numbers. That is not a valid complaint. President Trump 10 days later. More votes than they had voters, and many other states also. Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue, January 3rd, 2021. We would say to him, we checked that out and there's nothing to it. And we would cite to certain allegations and so like such as Pennsylvania, right? No, there were not 250,000 more votes reported than there were actually cast. That's just not true. That's not true. So we would like to, so we would say things like that. President Trump 3 days later. In Pennsylvania, you had 205,000 more votes than you had voters. And the number is actually much greater than that now. That was as of a week ago. And this is a mathematical impossibility unless you want to say it's a total fraud. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, January 2nd, 2021. Trump. It's 44,502 who voted, but they weren't on the voter registration roll, which they had to be. You had 18,325 vacant address voters. The address was vacant, and they're not allowed to be counted. That's 18,325. Raffensperger. Well, Mr. President, the challenge you have is the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong. President Trump 2 days later. 4,502 illegal ballots were cast by individuals who do not appear on the state's voter rolls. Well, that's sort of strange. 18,325 illegal ballots were cast by individuals who registered to vote using an address listed as vacant according to the Postal Service. Georgia, oh my, how many? This is going to take like, okay, that's not too bad. It's only like a dozen and a half, 2 dozen lies, major lies that they went through right here of him just deliberately lying to the public about the election results in very specific terms when he knew it wasn't true. Okay. Should we get through all of this tonight? Because I was kind of hoping to. Well, let's just do it. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, January 2nd. Trump. So dead people voted, and I think the number is close to 5,000 people. And they went to obituaries. They went to all sorts of methods to come up with an accurate number, and a minimum is close to about 5,000 voters. Raffensperger. The actual number were two. Two. Two people that were dead that voted. So that's wrong. President Trump 4 days later. The number of fraudulent ballots that we've identified across the state is staggering. Over 10,300 ballots in Georgia were cast by individuals whose names and dates of birth match Georgia residents who died in 2020 and prior to the election. Georgia Secretary of State General Counsel Ryan Germany. Trump. You had out of state voters. They had voted in Georgia, but they were from out of state of 4,925. Germany. Everyone everyone we've been through are people that lived in Georgia, moved to a different state, then moved back to Georgia legitimately. They moved back in years ago. This was not like something just before the election. So there's something about that data that's just it's not accurate. President Trump 4 days later, and at least 15,000 ballots were cast by individuals moved out of the state who moved out of the state prior to November 3rd election. They say they moved right back. White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. The one specific I remember referencing was I don't agree with the Dominion track. I specifically referenced waving him off of the Dominion theory earlier in my testimony. Q. Are you saying that Are you saying you think he still continued to tweet that after you waved him off at A? Answer, yes. Or yeah. President Trump. Between mid-November and January 5th, President Trump tweeted or retweeted conspiracy theories about Dominion nearly 3 dozen times. Trump campaign manager, Trump campaign senior advisor Jason Miller. The international allegations for Dominion were not valid. Question. Okay, did anybody communicate that to the president? Answer. I know that was communicated. I know I communicated it. President Trump, you have Dominion, which is very suspect to start off with. Nobody knows the ownership. People say the votes are counted in foreign countries and much worse. Attorney General Bill Barr, November 23rd, 2020. I specifically raised the Dominion voting machines, which I found to be one of the most disturbing allegations. Disturbing in the sense that I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations. I told him that it was crazy stuff and they were wasting their time on that, and it was doing great disservice to the country. President Trump 3 days later. Those machines are fixed. They're rigged. You can press Trump and the vote goes to Biden. All you have to do is play with the chip. And they played with the chip, especially in Wayne County and Detroit. Attorney General Bill Barr, December 1st, 2020. I explained, I said, look, if you have a machine and it counts 500 votes for Biden and 500 votes for Trump, and then you go back later and you will have the 1,000 pieces of paper put through the machines, and you can see if there's any discrepancy. There has been no discrepancy. President Trump 1 day later. In one Michigan county, as an example, that used Dominion systems, they found that nearly 6,000 votes had been wrongly switched from Trump to Biden, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is what we caught. How many didn't we catch? Attorney General Bill Barr, December 14th, 2020. I will, Mr. President, but there are a couple of things. I responded. Understandings, my understanding is that our experts have looked at the Antrim situation and are sure it was a human error that did not occur anywhere else. And in any event, Antrim is doing a hand recount of the paper ballots, so we should know in a couple of days whether there is any real problem with the machines. President Trump 1 day later. This is big news. Dominion voting machines are a disaster for the country. Change the results of a landslide election. Can't let this happen. Antrim is a county? Or, oh, Michigan, okay. Then Deputy Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen, December 15, 2020. Other people were telling him there was fraud, corruption in the election. The voting machines were no good, and we were telling him that is inconsistent. By we, I mean Richard Donahue and myself. That was not what we were seeing. There was this open issue as to the Michigan report, and I think it was Mr. Cusinelli, not certain, but had indicated that there was a hand recount, and I think he said that's the gold standard. President Trump 1 day later. Study: Dominion voting machines shifted 2 to 3% of Trump votes to Biden. Far more votes than needed to sway the election. Florida, Ohio, Texas, many other states were won by even greater margins than projected. Did just as well in swing states, but bad things happened. OANN. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, December 18, 2020. I got a call from, I think, Mally Michael in Outer Oval, the president's assistant, and she said, I'm connecting you to the Oval. Somebody asked me, did I have any evidence of election fraud in the voting machines or election interference in our voting machines? And I said no. We've looked into that and there's no evidence of it. President Trump 1 day later. There could also have been a hit on our ridiculous voting machines during the election, which is now obvious that I won big, making it an even more corrupt embarrassment for the USA. DNI Ratcliffe and Sec Pompeo. Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue, December 31st, 2020. We definitely talked about Antrim County again. That was sort of done at that point because the hand recount had been done and all of that. But we cited back to that to say, this is an example of what people are telling you and what's being filed in some of these court filings that are just not supported by evidence. President Trump 2 days later. Well, Brad, that's not that there is an issue because we have a big issue with Dominion in other states, and perhaps in yours, in other states. We think we found tremendous corruption with Dominion machines, but we'll have to see. I won't give you I won't give Dominion a pass because we found too many bad things. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, January 2nd, 2020. Sorry, 2021. I don't believe that you're really questioning the Dominion machines because we did a hand retally, 100% retally of all the ballots and compared them to what the machine said and came up with virtually the same result. Then we did the recount and we got virtually the same result. President Trump 4 days later. In addition, there is the highly troubling matter of Dominion voting systems. In one Michigan county alone, 6,000 votes were switched from Biden to Trump, and the same systems are used in the majority of states in our country. There is clear evidence that tens of thousands of votes were switched from President Trump to former Vice President Biden in several counties in Georgia. All right. All right. Went a little bit later than I thought we would, but it's okay. I think that's good to go through. Um, all right. Well, I want to make a note of these pages here. 22 through 27. All right. Well, hey, thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good night. Like, comment, and subscribe as always.